healthy life. One thing my father used to say, it's always easier to avoid trouble than to live with the problems that trouble creates. Another thing he used to say was about friends. Just avoid people who might cause you trouble. So I went through life just gliding through life. I was very lucky. And I'll give you a few examples of my good luck. My first lucky thing was that having gone to 222, I was the only kid in my class who had the luck to go to Brooklyn Technical High School, which at that time was a small school in Brooklyn, in an 8-story building with 6,000 students. Very small school. And in that school, they had a football team with 6,000 students. They were all boys. No girls, all boys. They had a football team. So I was walking down the street one day to get the trolley car, which I had to take from Flatlands, out by Jamaica Bay, all the way downtown. It was a half-hour ride on the trolley car, but it was expensive. It was a nickel. It was great, though, because I did my homework on the trolley car, so I never had to do homework at home. Walking down the street, the fellow says, I'm going to try out for a football team. He says, why don't you try? So I said, okay. And I did. I made the team and he didn't. But you got an invitation to come here. And you're probably wondering, because no one has ever heard this expression, the judge. Well, the reason they called me the judge was because on the football team, you know, if you're not in the game, you're sitting on the bench. I was on the bench. And we were playing boys high. And our team, I was 155 pounds running guard. And you had to play offense and defense. And the coach said, we were playing against boys high, and there were 260 pounds and all this, you know. One fellow got hurt. The coach says, go in. Another fellow, go. Finally, I was the only fellow on the bench. And I'm sitting there, and another fellow got hurt on our team. And the coach said, stand up. We're sending in the bench. They called me the judge. I sat on the bench for 4 years. Story of my life. But I've been lucky all my life. I went to Brooklyn Tech, as I mentioned, and while there, I took a college preparation course, but as a thing, I took one course in printing. You know, you had to take the type and you put it in the stick, and then you took the stick and you tightened it up and you put it on the press and you made the impression. So from that course, the whole rest of my life evolved. Because when I was in the Army, I was in basic training, and as Hannah mentioned, I was night blind. I couldn't see in the dark. So normally, you know, I was very good, so they made me a squad leader. So at night, we used to go on these night walks, etc. And of course, we'd walk through the bushes, through the water, because we were going that way. And one day in the locker room, sometime later, I overheard a fellow say, I don't know why we're always walking through the water and going through the bushes when we could walk around them. I was nice to them. They hated when they had gas masks drilled. They couldn't see in the dark. Never bothered me. I couldn't see in the dark either. But with my good luck, I had a couple of things happen. One, when I was graduating from, I went in the Army for 2.5 years, and I went to Brooklyn College for 2 years. And when I got out of Brooklyn College, I read a couple of stories. One is about a fellow who rode a motorcycle across northern Africa from the east to the west. Got lost in the desert, almost died, got saved by some Bedouins or whatever. Never another story about a fellow who rode a bicycle from Switzerland down through the Middle East to Himalayas to Calcutta in 14 days into Burma. And it was really tough. And he fainted, he woke up, and there was a pit. And in the bottom of the pit, there was a tiger. Because the natives had set the pit against the tiger. So I decided, being very bright, you can tell that, very bright, to ride a bicycle from the north to south of Africa. Fortunately, there were no roads. So two fellas said, let's go, but we want to go to Europe. So I spent 9 months on a bicycle, hitchhiking and traveling through Europe. Went to 14 countries. When I came back, what was I going to do? Go to college. So there were 2 applications for college, both of which were 1 page long. So I filled them out and sent them away. And Carnegie Tech said, okay, you can come here in a course, luck, printing management. Everybody in the school with this course, it was a 2-year course, was in commercial printing. So naturally, when I was getting ready to graduate and look for a job, I should look in commercial printing, right? Nope. Newspaper. So the Daily News and the Los Angeles Times interviewed me, and both of them offered me a job. So I went to work with the Daily News as an assistant to the business manager. And what kind of work did I do? Naturally, something I was trained for. It was really industrial engineering. But I went to Carnegie Tech, so naturally I knew all about that. Anyway, one of my first assignments, big assignment, was, and this is the key of my story about the success in life. One of my first assignments was the removal and installation of all the press rumors of the Daily News. And at that time, the Daily News only had a small circulation of 2 million daily and 4 million on Sunday. And they also had a small production operation, printing operation. You know, they only used 600 million pounds of newsprint a year to put out those papers that everybody read in the subways and those days. Well, anyway, this installation schedule originally was for 36 months. Being an industrial engineer, I was coordinating the whole thing, and we did it in 2.5 years. Saved the company about $1 million, so quickly. So I kept working there, and then they promoted me to production manager. It wasn't a big job. It was only the biggest circulation operation paper in the world, really, at that time. Newspaper production. We had 3,000 employees in the department, 8 unions. Very simple operation. But my forte was designing new systems on how to do things. And I was so good. I designed, in 1962, I got the idea to design a computerized operation for a linotype machine. And that was great. That was so successful, it led to the 114-day strike. They put 4 newspapers out of business. My biggest claim to fame. The World Telegram, Herald Tribune, Journal American, and the Daily Mirror went out of business. Because after the strike, the newspaper signed a contract, they couldn't make any changes for 10 years. And between the loss of advertising during the strike and the inability to make improvements in their operations, they did. It was a success. But my real story of success is that I left this big job and took a smaller job in charge of the Westchester Rocklands, 8 small daily newspapers in White Plains, whose circulation was only 187,000. And I did it for very good reasons. The first was that it was only 20 minutes from home in the car to drive there, whereas it was an hour on the subway to get down to New York all the time. Second was really, there were no unions, so if I had a bright idea, maybe we could do something. So we did do things. We converted from 5 small printing operations to 1 big central operation. We converted from hot metal to photocopy to computerized typesetting. And in the computerized typesetting, I don't know why, but they kept asking me to make speeches in Las Vegas and Washington. Switzerland, Belgium. Then, all of a sudden, I decided it was time for change. So I moved up again. I bought a weekly newspaper with 4,600 circulation in Albany, New York. Best move I ever made. I was making 5 times the salary at Westchester that the publisher of my little paper was making. And I never really thought it through as to how I was going to make a living with this. Anyway, the paper grew. There for 20 years, had a wonderful time. And in 1980, when I moved there, I saw something in the paper about a banjo band. But for 18 years, I couldn't find that banjo band. But luckily, one day, I read an ad in the paper that said the banjo band was giving a concert in Troy. And I went. It wasn't a concert, they were having a rehearsal. But I had played tennis with Bert, and Kitty came up and said, "Oh, why don't you join us?" So that's when I became a banjo mandolin player, and for 10 years had such a wonderful time with it. But the secret of my success is that I never really worried or was interested in money, but it was the important things in life. But the most important one, I'm leaving to the last, which how lucky you can be. When I was at the Daily News, there was a young lady down in the circulation department, and her name was Mary Donnelly. And guess who that was? Mary had 3 little kids. Well, anyway, during a strike, I would have to stay in Manhattan and be available because if they had negotiating questions, etc. So one day I called Mary, and as Hannah said, I asked her, look, get the New York Times and see if there's a place for sale in New Rochelle or Maryland. And she said, you're not going to bury me in the country, because she was a city girl. But she relented, and she married me, and we had the most wonderful life. And mostly because the secret of marriage to me was Mary always wanted whatever was best for me. And I always wanted whatever was best for Mary. And that's what made it. Anyway, final little thing was music. In 1998, Mary said, I want to retire. Because she had come to work at the Spotlight. And she didn't do much. She was the janitor, she was the best typist, she was the receptionist, she was, I used to call her the unofficial mayor because she knew everybody in town, you know. She wanted to retire, so we retired. And just at that time, we met the banjo. And that's when I got back into music. And it was wonderful because in Albany, there was folk music, there was Irish music, there was banjo music, there was a community orchestra. And from that, I developed this wonderful thing. So today, we've got 4 wonderful groups playing and singing with us. The unfortunate part, there's another 4 groups. The Hocus Pocus Jazz Band, the Sharps and Five Singers Group, Tim Bishop plays great piano, like Esther, and Tim Lawson plays great piano, and we play together. So there are 4 other groups that we just don't have time to hear. Are you lucky? And I forgot my family, because Winnie plays the piano, Mary plays great classical guitar, and Isabel plays the flute in the community orchestra and the school jazz group.
All right.